What's up guys, welcome to another video. We're back here with Zent Rose. This is my second time collaborating with him. The first video we did together on the affordable sports cars, which that part was a little heatedly debated. Yeah. It did well, so I wanted to do another video with Zent. And today we are in a few extremely special cars. They're all Porsche 911 GT cars, and they all have manual transmission. So I recently drove a 991.1 GT3 with a PDK, and out of 130 cars that I rank in my performance index, that ended up narrowly edging out the GT2 by 1 point. So it's number one in my list. Nice. So this might completely shake that up. I'm a manual diehard. I know you like manuals a lot as well. So we have the 997.1 GT3, 2007. That's the car we're in right now. Both of us have driven all three cars, so we'll get a nice back-to-back sense of how they compare. The second car will be the 2008 997 GT2, which I previously reviewed, but I thought it would be good to compare to the GT3s and see whether the turbo or the NA engine is really more fun. And then last but not least, we have probably my ultimate dream car right now, which is the 991.2 GT3 Touring. When we look at these three cars together, we're talking about a current market value north of $500,000. This GT3 997.1 probably worth around 120 to 130. GT2 probably worth around 170 to 180, and then the Touring probably close to 250, maybe 230 to 250. So one of the things I want to find out with you, Zen, is after driving these cars, does the extra money actually make sense? Just like we did for the affordable sports cars. This is the unaffordable sports cars comparison. Yeah. So you drove this car first. It serves as a good baseline. What did you think of it overall, just in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, I would say it's like a much more raw car than the other two. There's less refinement. The clutch is stiffer. This is my favorite.
It's your favorite because it's the most raw.
Yeah, that must be it. But then the interesting thing about it is the other cars do come alive at certain points on the road, and so I wouldn't say that this is my all-time favorite at every point in the road, but if I'm looking at the big picture, this would be the one that I would choose.
As a Porsche GT car that you're driving hard in the canyons or on the track, this is probably your favorite. Yeah. Coming from Mr. Lotus Elise, which makes sense. You like raw cars. Yeah. This car, by the way, has an aftermarket Sharkworks exhaust and a couple of little bits here and there, but performance-wise, completely stock, no tune, no suspension or anything. And it's on the stock steel brakes. Let's listen to this 3.6 liter Metzger. 400 RPM redline in this thing. So the sport mode, make the exhaust louder. If this isn't one of the best sounding engines in the world, I don't know what is, man.
Yeah, this is pretty great.
Oh, yes.
I loved how intuitive it was to rev match this car. Like right when I got in and you start driving it fast, it's just everything works as it should.
And I think that's due to the NA nature of the engine. It's so responsive.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing I love about these 997s is the hydraulic steering. They're the last generation of 911 to have hydraulic steering.
Yeah, okay.
And when I drove the 991.1 GT3 with electric steering, I was like, this is so good, I don't even miss the hydraulic steering. But now driving them back to back, this is where it's at.
Yes. You can't tell the difference.
There's so much more feedback through the wheel.
Yeah.
What I love about the 911 is that it's not perfect. You do feel that rear weight bias. It poses a challenge to the driver, a very unique challenge. When you enter a corner, if you enter too quickly without trail braking, you do get understeer because the front end gets light. And if you add power to try to neutralize that understeer, it actually just understeers more because now you're putting more weight, you're transferring more weight from the front to the rear. It really puts the power down at the rear end coming out of a corner, but going into a corner, you really have to be patient. Just feed the power on the exit, and it just hooks up. This suspension feels pretty softly sprung for a GT3. I was surprised. I think the GT2 that you're about to drive feels a little bit more well composed, more well controlled in the corners. This one, it shimmies around a little bit mid corner.
Yeah, that's right. And then if you turn that sport mode off, it gets even worse.
Even softer. That's the most surprising part about this car. I thought really the main difference between the GT3 and the GT2 would be the engine, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some more subtle differences here. Now that said, the engine, it sounds infinitely better than the one in the GT2.
Yes.
The turbos in the GT2 really muffle the sound. And this car also has the base steel brakes, not the optional carbon ceramics. The stopping power is good, don't get me wrong. It had very nice linear pedal feel. But the carbon ceramics in that GT2, it's so much firmer, it's so much more immediate, but not in an abrupt way. It's still very linear. But this it feels a little bit more old school. Not that long ago, I remember these were like 70, 80 grand. That's impossible nowadays. They're like minimum 110 to 120.
80 grand is kind of a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
It really is a car that, at that price point, I would probably sell my NSX to get one. So this is a start to a very promising day here. As you can see, we have quite the collection of 911s. We have Johnny's 996 base Carrera. We have the 991.2, and then we have the GT2 997. So let's have you hop into the GT2.
Okay.
And we'll get your thoughts on the car, because I've spent quite a good amount of time with that car at this point.
All right, so we are back in the 997. What is this, 997 what?
I don't think there's a .1 or a .2 for the GT2, actually.
Okay.
So we just call this the 997 GT2.
Okay. I'm not up on my Porsche naming convention,
that's where I come into play.
So that's why we got this guy. So yeah, the surprising thing to me about this car is that we're looking at, you said $170,000 to $180,000.
Yeah, it's about 50 grand more than the 997 GT3.
So is this worth 50 grand more? And I think in some ways it is. You get in it and there's a distinctive difference in this car toward other cars in that price range.
Yeah. I mean, the big thing is the turbos. I mean, this...
Yeah, just a massive wave of torque coming in when you step on the gas.
Yeah, there's a little bit of turbo lag down low, but once it gets going around 3 grand, it pulls so hard and so smooth to the red line.
And you notice that there's a much tamer exhaust note.
Yes.
And the whole car feels more composed, less raw. And I don't need to aggressively shift around these corners.
Yeah.
I can step on the gas and it will take off.
That is the interesting thing. You mentioned that this one's a little bit less raw. That's what I also noticed compared to the 997 GT3. A big part of that, obviously, is the engine sound. The turbos muffle the sound quite a bit.
Right.
A little bit vacuum cleaner-like from inside. But even the suspension in this car feels a little bit more well composed, whereas the GT3 kind of moves around mid-corner.
Yes.
Even with the PASM turned on. So we'll turn it on now.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But even the softer mode, it feels more planted. Oh my gosh. The straight line speed of this car, that rush of torque is part of the experience of a GT2, and you cannot get that in a GT3 of any kind.
Yes, you're right, yeah. The other thing that you mentioned before was that this is on the Cup 2 tires.
Cup 2 tires.
And the GT3 was on
the 4S tire, Michelin 4S. So that is a big point. So thanks for bringing that up. These tires are a lot stickier, and it makes the front end feel a lot more responsive. What I didn't expect, though, is the rear end of this car feels more planted, even with the additional power.
Yeah. You notice that with the sport turned on, the sport suspension, it was kind of rough over
a little bit rougher, yeah.
So I kind of like it off on this road.
Yeah, whereas in the GT3, we like having it on, which, I don't know, if you guys, the viewers, if you know what the difference in suspension is between the 997.1 GT3 versus GT2,
let me know, because I couldn't find definitive info on that.
So another interesting thing about this is, in this price range, you're getting up into like the other areas of exotic cars.
Yeah.
And so
Like truly supercar money.
Yeah, and so I think we bought a McLaren for like 130, and that, I mean, the engine blew up and we had to replace it. But the experience of that was more violent than this, and then the 488 was also more violent than this. And I know that this was a 2008 car.
Yeah.
And so for 2008, when they say that this is a widowmaker, I think that other cars have gone much crazier since then. Yeah.
This is a refined driving experience. Like I could, other than the heavy clutch, I could daily this car.
Right. When I had that Z01 1LE, that thing, you could probably kill yourself in it.
Yeah.
It was just like totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is totally ridiculous too, though. Those lower gears are pretty wild, and having a manual transmission is a special part about this car, because all the exotics today have the dual clutch.
Yeah. So you get that seamless. There's no dip in torque between shifts, whereas this, it's like, oh, and then like you clutch in and you shift. It's an event.
Yes.
You have to work to drive it, and that's part of the joy of driving cars like this.
Yeah, and that's why people love manual transmissions. So, and then when you're driving these dual clutch cars, these dual clutch supercars, I mean, I can't help but think like, oh, this is so smooth. I'd rather be in an electric car, and electric cars are already eclipsing their performance.
Right.
And so I think long-term cars like this that have the manual transmission, that are more engaging to drive, are going to be worth more in the future.
I agree, and that's already reflected in the price of these cars today. So.
Right. So I mean, at 170, 180, it's not a bad buy.
Consider that they only made a few hundred of these too. This is guaranteed to go up in value over time.
Right. So between those other two cars, what I like about this is we get the open. Oh, there's rocks there. We get the open area here, which I like. I prefer this.
Yeah.
But it's also comfortable. This is daily drivable for me.
Yeah, I agree. In the 991, as we were talking about, they changed from this, for lack of a better way to describe it, like floor and wall setup here to the center console, to a more like sloping piece. So you get a lot more buttons on that center console. The distance between the steering wheel and shifters much shorter, which is very ergonomic. But to your point, you get less elbow room because you have just this long transmission tunnel in the middle.
Right.
So I, for one, cannot wait to get into the touring. That back-to-back experience really reveals a lot about these cars. I think a lot of people say it doesn't matter what GT3 you buy, or any Porsche GT you buy, as long as you buy one, you're in a good place.
Yeah.
And while I do agree, I really want to delve deeper into it and figure out what the subtle differences between these generations really are. So
yeah.
Let's hop into touring and see what's what.
Okay.
Last but not least, we are in the 991.2 GT3 Touring. This is a much more refined car than a 997. As you were saying, a lot less elbow room because this transmission tunnel just extends all the way up here. But otherwise, oh my god, this interior is nice. Look at these seats, these buckets. I don't know what you call this.
Is it like sawtooth or something?
Sawtooth, yeah, that's probably what it is.
Yeah, I don't know what the term is.
But they're full carbon buckets with leather. I mean, this interior is just carbon here. A lot less squeaks and rattles in these 991s compared to the 996, 997. You're constantly hunting down squeaks and rattles in the interior. This is just solid. This is the best sports car interior I've ever been in. It's so focused, but so ergonomic. This one is spec'd out with the carbon ceramic brakes. It also has aftermarket BBS wheels. This car right now, close to 250 grand.
Oh, geez.
So it's certainly not an affordable sports car by any means. But as we're about to find out, I think you can make the argument that it's worth the money. So we have sport mode turned on, PASM turned on for the firmer suspension. We also have the loud exhaust turned on. So let's see how it does. All right. 9,000 RPMs. Oh, this is so much faster than a 997 GT3. So in this car, we've got a 4-liter flat six making 500 horsepower, 339 foot-pounds, versus the 997 GT3's 415 horsepower,
and 300 foot-pounds. So it's about 20% more power. This actually has less power than the GT2, 30 horsepower less. But I think in a straight line, it feels every bit as fast.
Yeah, and then revving it out too, just that characteristic makes it so much more engaging.
And because of the flat foot shifting, you don't get that dip in torque every time you clutch in.
Yeah.
For better or worse. I mean, the nice thing about it is you can turn that sport button off and just have it be a fully manual transmission experience. You know, you have to rev match your downshifts and all of that.
I mean, the biggest thing that I noticed right away in this was the clutch.
Much lighter.
Much lighter.
Much lighter.
Yeah.
The downside is you don't quite have the same level of feel in the clutch, so the engagement point's a little bit more vague. But for daily driving, this is a much better clutch.
Yeah, that's right. And then when you first get started in it, it sort of feels heavier, but as you pick up speed on the road, the characteristic of that is that it feels more planted. How does that sports suspension feel now that we have that on?
It feels good. I think the difference between soft and firm for this PASM setup is more subtle than the 997 generation.
Okay. Yeah, I can't tell the difference from the passenger seat.
Yeah, I can barely tell the difference. Yeah, so we're giving it a little bit of space so we can really open it up on this road here. But this car just feels many notches above in terms of quality and also just comfort.
Yeah, that's true.
It's certainly less raw. The other thing that could be a pro or a con depending on your use case for the car is while this electric steering rack is the best in the business right now, it does not have that wriggle in your hands kind of texture about the road surface kind of information that you get from the 997 hydraulic rack.
Yeah.
Feels less 911-y than the 997. You don't quite notice the rear weight bias as much in this car. The front end is it's just pinned.
Yep. It feels glued to the road.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
We're also on a Michelin Cup 2 tire here, same as the GT2. The one thing I don't like though, compared to the 997 generations, I don't have as much confidence in the front because of the lack of steering feel.
Yes.
Even though I know there's plenty of front grip, I don't feel it through the wheel. Handles those bumps way better.
Yeah, definitely. I was noticing that too on the stiff setting. It was
so compliant.
Yeah, not a lot of noise came through to us either. The steering to me almost felt like, you know how certain sports cars, it's instantaneous when you turn in. There's that reaction. It feels like there's almost a delay.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay. And that's crazy to say because this is the best electric steering on the market right now. If you talk to any reviewer who's just been reviewing new cars, this is the best steering. Oh my gosh. This engine has a much more high-pitched note than the Metzger. The way it just revs out, it's zingy at the top end, but not quite as zingy as a 991.1 GT3. I think that has to do with a larger displacement. This is a 4-liter versus a 3.8.
Yeah.
What a driving experience this is. This is the exact spec I would want a 991.2 GT3. It's just more comfortable, it's more subtle than the big wing version. You do still get a retractable rear spoiler that comes up at 75 miles an hour, and it lowers back down once you go below 50 miles an hour. Obviously has a lot less downforce than the fixed wing GT3, but I mean, for a car like this, I would track this maybe a couple times a year if I had one, but really it's designed to be driven as a road car, and that's where it's so beautiful. It has a much wider range of capability than the 997 generations.
Yeah.
Now we talked about the GT2 being pretty comfortable, but this is
next level.
Next level.
Yeah.
This is really a car I can imagine myself daily driving, honestly. It's
it's almost like two personalities when you rev that engine out.
Right.
And then even in between those two personalities, there's a lot of torque going on, so you don't always have to shift.
Yeah, exactly. You can drive it at 2 tenths, you can drive it at 6 tenths, you can drive it at 10 tenths. it's amazing in every single part of that scale.
Yes, yeah.
And that's where I think this car has a big leg up on the 997, because that car is like, at 2/10, it's like, okay, this clutch is really heavy, the shifter effort's very high, you know, there's a little bit less compliance in the suspension, more road noise. This car just, it feels like a luxury car, honestly, around town at low speed, other than slightly elevated levels of tire noise.
Where is the front lift on this? Remember,
That's this button here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it comes with a front axle lift option, so if we wanted to get over a speed bump or something, press that button and in 2 seconds you got plenty of travel at the front. So what do you think? I mean, we've driven all 3 cars now.
I think that everyone's gonna have their own flavor of what they want with these.
I agree. I think at the end of the day, you can try to objectively compare these cars from a standpoint of performance and comfort and all of that in terms of how much you're paying for them, but I think it really depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah.
If you want a raw driving experience, the 997 GT3 is more impressive of a car than this when you really think about it, and it's half the price.
Right.
The 997 GT2, it's really, to me, it's all about that turbo acceleration. I mean, that's really where that car comes alive. This GT3, like I said, has a much wider range of ability, and I think that's where that price tag of close to 250K actually kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm saying that.
It kind of does, because you almost get the 2 other cars in one package.
Exactly.
It's just,
and then some.
It sounds so ridiculous, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, you get the comfort of the GT2 except amplified, and then you get 80% of the rawness of the 997 GT3.
Yeah, and then as you were saying, on that straightaway, it feels every bit as fast
as the GT2.
As the GT2, right? And so this thing it's just nuts.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you guys think of these cars. I mean, I know the last video that Zent and I did was called the affordable sports cars. Debatable, I guess. But this is definitely 3 very unaffordable cars for the average car enthusiast. That said, it's been just such a pleasure to be able to drive these back to back. I think more so than talking about how these cars compare to one another, the real point I want to make here is let's just celebrate that Porsche has made so many great generations of the manual 911 and the manual 911 GT car. These are truly, truly special cars. They are cars that I would consider spending my money on. In fact, if I were to replace my NSX, it would have to be a Porsche GT car. And they're not going to be making these for that much longer. I mean, the 992 just came out, and we do get a manual with the GT3, which is fantastic. But who knows what the next generation is going to look like? It might go hybrid. It might go full electric. I mean, at this point, we're at a spot where cars like this are the end of an era.
Right.
And we're not going to be able to enjoy these for much longer unless we just buy these old ones now and like hope they go up in value.
Right.
So, okay, it looks like we got like a BMW meet or something going on here.
Yeah.
So let's back up. All right, and just like that, our timing is perfect. We have like 30 BMWs showing up, but it was great to collab with you.
Yeah, nice
again,
seeing you.
Zent. Let me know what you guys think of the video. Do you want to see more comparisons, more collabs? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.